right. Hello, everybody. My name is Matheus Nazário, and as for today, we'll be talking about some strategies for incorporating the four skills in public school classrooms. Currently, I'm based in Brazil, so pretty much of my experience, we'll be talking about the experience in Brazil. But as I have students in 12 countries, I've carried out a survey, and then I collected some data that we can incorporate and use as strategies for teaching these skills in public schools. Well, first and foremost, I think that it's important, pivotal actually, for us to take a look at our goal for the presentation. And our main objective for today is that by the end of this talk, participants will have reflected and seen some strategies that can be applied to incorporate the usage of the four skills in public school lesson settings. And this is something that we should bear in mind because when we stop to think about public school settings, many people just think about, okay, I have some problems with that. I have the time bound and other areas, but there are some strategies that might be applied and can be most beneficial for us and our students. And then our presentation will be mainly conducted by three questions. And then step by step, I'll be answering each of the questions and bringing up some ideas for what we can do. And then the first question that will be guiding our presentation today is what idea do we have of English classes in mainstream public schools? The second one, what problems do teachers face when they are teaching at a public school setting? And last but not least, how can we work on the four skills in a public school setting if we only have two 50-minute lessons a week, and sometimes even one with 40 students? In this case, for this last question, this is a situation that in the survey that I carried out from 12 countries, 7 countries are pretty much in the same way, where the teachers have only like 50-minute lessons twice a week, sometimes once a week, either in secondary school or in high school, and then the lessons are overcrowded. But first, let's wonder what idea we have of English classes in mainstream public schools. I collected some information from a few students, and Juliana from Brazil, she said, I used to have the feeling that everything was being repeated over the years, and my teacher focused only on grammar and some reading strategies for a name. For the ones of you who don't know what ENEM is, in Brazil we have this Exame Nacional do Ensino Médio, which would be something like the SAT from the United States, where the students have up to 90 questions to be answered, and only 5 in a foreign language, but mainly focusing on reading. And one idea that people had in Brazil, in Spain, in Russia, which were the people that I was talking to, was that the lessons were mainly focused on grammar and translation, using the grammar translation method or approach, or at least an adaptation of it, in a way that it ended up being somehow detrimental for the learners. Turning to another comment, I have Raul from Spain that said, I studied in public schools in Spain my entire life, and some of my teachers did not have a very high language level proficiency. That being said, the majority of the lessons were mainly focused on grammar and translation. Unfortunately, this is another reality. If we stop to think, and in this case, putting my country in the place, in Brazil there are 220 million people, and only 5% speak English. And from these 5%, only 2 speak English fluently. And then what happens is that in a public school setting, we have some problems, we have some struggles in terms of lack of resources, students who are not willing to learn, they are demotivated or unmotivated. And this ends up backfiring even the teachers because they have their language proficiency, but they are not really willing to learn more or to develop more because they know that only the grammar will be sufficient as per se. And the last comment that I brought in here to make us think is from Alessandra from Brazil. And then this also leads us to our next question. And she says, I think that overcrowded classes is something that draws my attention in English lessons. Although my teacher tried to make us do something, I think something that played a big role in the lessons were short time, overcrowded classes, and leader interaction. And by talking to these people, this was something that was omnipresent and ubiquitous if we stop to think that looking back then, when we are in the secondary school or in high school, unfortunately, these problems like having 40 students in a class, having 30 students in a class, or the teacher not speaking English like fluently, or even trying to use English in the lessons, ended up having a bad, like an infamous thing for public schools. And I myself, as a student, I came from a public school, and during my time, I remember that I studied English apart from the school in an English course with this teacher who is here in the photo with me, and I had normal classes. And here we have 4 terms per year. And one thing that happened was that there was a book that I used to use. This book had 8 chapters. As we had 4 terms, we were supposed, as a test, we were supposed to translate 2 units and hand in to the teacher. And this was very sad for me because I could see that I was really trying. Some of my friends were really trying. We were learning, but people were like, oh, but this is a public school. The students are different. They have different backgrounds. So unfortunately, I'll keep it the lowest I can. And when I became a teacher, I was 16 years old. I started as an intern in a public school. And I asked this teacher in the photo, what could I do to be a good teacher and really to make a difference in my students as my teacher did to me? And one thing that she said was, Matheus, really try to think on your students' goals. Don't teach the book, teach the students. It doesn't matter how experienced you are, we will always be learning. And then this comes to my attention and reminds me of this quote from Penny Ur, where she says, teachers who have been teaching for 20 years may be divided into 2 categories: those with 20 years experience and those with 1 year's experience repeated 20 times. Well, now I'm 25 years old. I've been teaching for basically from 8 to 9 years in August. And one thing that I can say is that for sure, it's not 8 years, like one year experience repeated 8 times. And this is something that I really want us to think here during this presentation today. Well, and moving on to the second part of the talk in our presentation, what problems we face, we as teachers, when we are teaching in a public school setting. I've asked some teachers and friends of mine, and some things were ubiquitous in their answers, such as the lack of resources. Specifically, if you come from a private school where you have all the possibilities and everything else, when you end up being stuck in a public school setting, you see that you won't have like a digital board. Your CPD is not going to be the same as when you are teaching an English course. And I say it by myself because I've taught International House for over 3 years, and I was used to have everything. But then in 2022, I decided to take a test to become a public servant. I passed in the first position. I started working in this public school last year. And then I could really feel how this lack of resources ended up being something bad for me and the students. But there are ways that we can take a look and try to help the learners, like by sending a PDF file, for example. Or, of course, we might spend some time writing, but then trying to make them interact. Another fact that we have is overcrowded classrooms. As I had said before, something about 30, 40 students. But then one thing that we can do is really grouping the students, trying to help them in terms, even for homework, for checking, and for everything else, by putting them in groups. Of course, not big groups, but small groups. This can be very beneficial for the students and for us. Another problem would be student diversity. And then when I say student diversity, I mean it in 2 ways. The first way is students with special needs. And the second one would be heterogeneous classes. As we're talking about a public school, it's not an English course. Not everybody's at the same level. So one thing that we can do is really trying to, as now we have AI, artificial intelligence to help us, we can pick up some materials and then try to adapt, or even ask the artificial intelligence to help us. For example, imagine that you have a text in the book, and then this text is pretty long. It's pretty difficult for the level of your learners. Let's say that they are 12th grade. One thing that you can do is, for instance, pick up this text, go to ChatGPT or go to Tree. There is this very good website, which is Tree, TWEE, Moodle.com, where it can create materials for English teachers like texts, activities in terms of seconds. Of course, you can adapt it, and this would be more beneficial for you. Lack of educational support, as I had said, discipline issues, as we might have some students with social problems, their families. In cases of not so well developed countries, there might be students who go to school just because of the food, for example. And the pressure for standardized test results, such as if we stop to think, in Russia, all the students, when they finish their high school, they are supposed to take the IELTS, and they should take at least a 6 or a 6.5. And this is something like a B2 level. And when you have lots of students and you have all this pressure to take a test and then really get the grade that you need, it's kind of difficult. But well, moving really to the topic of including the forest schools in the public school setting, there's a quote from Woodward in her book called Planning Lessons and Courses that she says, if you're a novice teacher or have a difficult class, I'd suggest you to think to yourself, what will I be happy with? By this, I mean, you should ask yourself what, as a minimum, would make you feel you had achieved something by the end. And then we might stop and think, okay, I have a 40-minute lesson, I have a 50-minute lesson, and how can I incorporate what I am supposed to do? Let's pick up as an example the present simple, because when we think of books or standardized books, they have the grammar part, the vocabulary part, and then instead of thinking grammatically, you could think functionally. Okay, I want to teach about the present simple. So what is it used for? It's used to talk about routines. It's used to talk about general truths. So you can pick it up and adapt it to things that are in the reality of the student. Of course, you're not going to incorporate the four skills at once. Maybe you can work with some listening, and then from this listening, you pick up some vocabulary, or vice versa. You teach the vocabulary, and then in the listening, you put the vocabulary that you had, and then the students could start noticing it more. Of course, you should break the things down into pieces in a way that if it is difficult, keep your goals the lowest as possible in terms of what minimum would make you feel you had achieved something at the end, because this is what matters. And then something that Woodward adds is that things are plain when something's explained successfully. So instead of narrating, because we have over 40 students, 30 students in the class, try to use the imperative, try to use TPR, total physical response, in a way that the students could see, and asking them to model what they are supposed to do. Well, picking up this part of, okay, let's make it more functional. Davies and Pierce say that real success in English teaching and learning is when the learners can actually communicate in English inside and outside the classroom. And then by incorporating the four skills in terms of asking the students to read, putting really the students to read and to speak and to write, to really listen to it, we can show that English is not something far from the reality. Imagine that you are a Mexican person and you make border with the US. Most likely you should see an American person. Okay, I don't see them. It's not something that is in my day-to-day life, but perhaps you see some words, some slangs that are used, and we adequate to our own language. And then we can make it out of a lesson to the students by showing a video, by taking the students out, asking them the vocabulary, taking them to the mall, and then showing them that what they are learning, it's not just for inside the classroom, but also for outside. Harmer, in his book, How to Teach English, says that when we are engaged in conversation, we are bound to listen as well as speak. Lectures frequently rely on notes they have written previously, and people listening to lectures often write notes on their own. So when you are dealing with a listening task, for example, I always recommend for us by using this leading task to activate the students' schemata about the topic. And then when we go to the reading for gist, to understand the global idea, the main idea, and for the specific information later, It's pivotal for us to ask the student not just to put it true or false, or not just check, but correct why it is false. And then you might use some useful language for them in a way that, okay, I don't have a certain level of fluency in English, but as I have these useful language, I can try to incorporate it more. And then a note is an example of writing, and then you can incorporate it with the listening. As well as the students are listening to something, then you can ask them to discuss. So this way you'd be incorporating one or two skills to the class. Of course, you might have your main objective, but subsidiary aims are something that we should bear in mind as well. And then Harmer continues by saying, even reading, generally thought of as a private activity, often provokes conversation and comment, because when we read, we have this impact about what we have read. Henkel also says that in the spoken medium, listening selections are used as models for speaking, interaction, or pronunciation skills. And in the written medium, reading input supplies models for writing. So this is something that we can do as well. We're working with the vocabulary, we're working with the grammar or with the situation that we are talking about. And then we can work with the pronunciation with the students by drilling, by doing some choral drilling, by doing some individual drilling, asking them to notice the word stress, in terms of the accent as well, like how how an American person says something, how an Indian person says something, and then the students can be aware of the nuances of English, and their listening is going to be sharper. Well, here I put some things that we could do, such as working on projects. So one thing that we can do, for example, is thinking of that if I want to incorporate more skills, why not asking the students to give me a presentation at the end? So we could ask the learners to choose a topic, for example, that they learned throughout the term, and then present it to others. So they should present it in English. The other students would be practicing their listening, and the other students would be practicing not only their hard skills in terms of the English language itself, but also their soft skills in terms of social interaction, critical thinking, etc. The second point is working on some particular skills in a class and then keeping the same topic, trying to incorporate a different skill. You are not obligated to try to teach dozens of rules at the same time. Okay, I want to work with the present perfect. Why not talking about experiences? You'll be working with the present perfect in a way that your students will be practicing their critical thinking and about the things that they have done. They are going to develop some vocabulary because they should need the words to talk about their experiences. And this would be really beneficial for them, such as the use of stories as well. So in a class, you put the students to listen to the story, and then in the other class, they have to write their own stories. Something that you can also do is to use this different skill as homework. And to facilitate your checking, you can work with small groups. Because if we bear in mind and think, okay, I have 35 students, and then as an English teacher in a public school, I have 13 classes. How will I check everything? Putting them in groups, try to help them, 4 people, 5 people, and then this will be handier for you. Using songs as well would be good. For the usage of songs, I do recommend a website which is called Lyrics Training, where the students can kind of play. There's an app as well, so they choose the song in the language they would like to listen to, and then they have to fill in the gaps. And if you log in the computer, you can select and create a PDF. So imagine that there is this song and you want to work with this specific vocabulary or this specific feature. You can choose the words that you want to be hidden, and then you can start working with the students with them. So it's not just about filling the gaps, but noticing how linking happens, and then you'll be working with more features, not only of listening, but also of pronunciation. Using graded readers as well, as your learners might not have the same level, and mixing similar skills, such as reading and speaking, lexis and listening, pronunciation and speaking, writing and listening, and then the students may develop their skills more and more. One thing that I myself like doing is using an opening with them by exposing them to the topic, and then they can activate their schemata and share their opinion. Then I expose them to the topic itself. I also like doing a recapitulation of the things just to make sure that everybody understood, and then nominating here plays a big role. Then, as an exercise, do some question and answer dialogue, a summary of the class, and as a closing, a task or a game. So in this way, the lessons can be engaging. And one thing that we should bear in mind when teaching at a public school is that variety is the spice of life. The more monotonous the classes are, the more the students will be, well, actually, the less the students will be engaged, and even ourselves. So let's try to variate. Let's try to keep it, maybe even keeping the topic, but trying to do something different that can be very handy for us. Well, and here I have some photos just to show my experience that I have here in Brazil. So what has been happening basically here, I took the students to an auditorium. We were learning the vocabulary about the school. As you can see, I do have some overcrowded lessons. And then I divided the students into groups, and all of them had to put the name of the places of the school, and we went around the school just to stick, and then we could learn the vocabulary about the subjects, about the places, and this was really good for them. They should ask the teachers the subjects they taught. In this picture here, it was after a restaurant class that we had. I took the students to a restaurant. Of course, each one of us paid our meal. And then we were supposed to ask the things just in English, so this could be practical. This other one was a presentation of the Odyssey that I have with these 12th grade students. So they presented it in English. It was an adaptation that they made. And most recently, I asked my students to choose one topic. I split them in groups, as I've mentioned. And then I asked them to create games and choose one topic that we had studied in a way that they should present it and teach the other students from other classes. And it was a success. They loved it. It was really, really good. Well, basically, this was all I had for you today. You have 10 minutes here for questions and answers. And just to finish, I'm Matheus Nazário again. I hold a graduation in languages, English and Portuguese, a specialization degree or post-graduation degree in English teaching methodologies. I'm also awarded with several Cambridge certificates, such as the CELTA PASB, TKT 1, the Linguist Skill, and the C1 Advanced. Here are my references: Harmer, Hinkle, Richard, and Woodward. And that's all for today. Thank you so very much.
Hello. So, okay, I'm informed that Matheus has suffered some technical problems. So hopefully he can join us in a moment. But, well, don't worry. Dear audience, please join me in giving a round of virtual applause to Matheus Nazário. I'm sure he's gonna say it later. Yes, he did a wonderful presentation about critical human rights education in English language classes. So if you have some questions, please write them down here on the chat, and we make sure we reach Matheus later, so we can reach him out and show him your questions, and he can answer the questions later on the chat that you can find here on the same event. So please feel free to write down your questions. Also, we have some comments saying hi Teresa, hi Emmanuel. We got also Lourdes, Alexa, Maria, Rosana, Alfredo, Bridget, John, Renato, Norman, Cari, Urba. So I'm pretty sure you all guys, all the audience, have very interesting questions. So feel free to write them down. We are going to reach Matheus later so he can reply to your questions. Also, I have some announcements. We are constantly trying to improve the quality of the work we do, and we place great importance on the view of the people we work with. Please help us with your feedback by answering the quality questionnaire, which you can find in the lobby. Your responses will be treated anonymously, and the questionnaire responders will participate in the raffle at the end of the event. So go and answer the questionnaires. Remember, it is totally anonymous, and you would participate in the raffle once you have responded the questionnaire. Also, another announcement is that be aware, if you have your registration for the Vivo 2024, your certificate will be available for download in the lobby as soon as you have attended all the full conference. After that, the link to download the certificate will be sent to you by email. Also, help us to build community by sharing your experience on social media. Have your saying during the event using the handle at MX British on Instagram and Twitter. And don't forget to use the hashtag Bibel2024. Thank you so much for joining us today. Continue enjoying the event.